because they're not talking about the business. They're not talking about what's important. They're not talking about how it's made. So the most important question that a CISO must be able to answer is, what business is your organization really in? Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this week's edition of Life of a CISO with yours truly, Dr. Eric Cole, where we get to talk about cybersecurity strategy and what it means to be a Chief Information Security Officer. And remember, if you haven't picked up your copy of Cyber Crisis, you definitely want to go to cybercrisisbook.com, cybercrisisbook.com, and pre-order your copy. It's going to be one of those key books. We put out over 30 preview books to different CEOs, executives, and all of the response is very, very positive. So you definitely want to make sure you get in on the Cyber Crisis bandwagon. So today, let's go ahead and just ground ourselves. What is the most important question that a world-class CISO must be able to answer? And I'm going to give you a little story, right? I'm going to do a little suspense here before I give you the answer, but I'll go give a little story. I'm often brought in when executives are struggling with their CISO, or if CISOs need coaching. I come in from a lot of different angles, but we had a particular client where the executive team wasn't really getting the information or data they needed from the CISO. So they asked me to sit in on one of the meetings. So I sat in on one of their quarterly meetings, no preparation, just sort of wanted to see how the CISO behaved and acted. So first thing CISO did is they came in and they loaded up a presentation, and I noticed it was 47 slides. I'll tell you right now, unless those 47 slides are animations of Bubbles the unicorn, right, jumping around a pot of gold, it's not going to work, right? So right away, I'm like, okay, this is not going to go well. But I kept an open mind, and I said, I believe in miracles, and miracles can happen, so maybe a miracle will happen. And they started off, and these were super detailed slides. I'm not going to mention any names, but there's a certain entity out there that I don't know what playbook they wrote, but they believe that your slides have to have like 800 million messages on it. So you have to have like detail here and a message here, and like they break it into 7 quadrants, and these things look impressive when you glance at them, but they're awful because there's way too much information. There's way too much detail. It doesn't always make sense. And the problem with a very, very detailed written slide is people are trying to read and understand the slide, and they don't pay attention to what you're saying. When I brief executives, I have one piece of paper, and very often I don't bring it up till the very end. I don't use slides. When I do most of my keynotes, I prefer not to have slides because 2 reasons. One, slides are a distraction. People are going to be reading them, and it's a handicap to you. Plus, they lock you in. When I do keynotes and I present to executives, I want to be able to adapt and adjust to body language. If I'm talking about a topic and they get really interested, I want to be able to talk more about that. And if it's a topic they're not interested in, I want to abandon and abort. For example, I was presenting 2 weeks ago, and I started going in and talking about the ransomware and the impact. And clearly, this was not something of interest because right away you saw everyone pick up their phones and you sort of look around. I'm like, okay, I originally thought I was going to spend 5 minutes on ransomware, but clearly that was not something of interest, so I aborted it. And then I mentioned the impact of migrating to the cloud, and I kid you not, this was the executive. And when I said, the cloud and I was like, okay, we're going there, right? So it gives you an opportunity. You want to read the audience and make sure they're getting the value and information out of it. But the one sheet I always have, and if you've listened to any of my Life of a CISO shows, you know it, but it's worth repeating. Come on, say it with me. Say it with me. When I go to the gym, I love listening to music. And one of my favorite videos is Bryan Adams. Yeah, I'm a product of the 80 and summer of 69. And what I love is he starts strumming it. And he goes, I got my first. And then he stopped and the whole audience, 6-string, bought it at the night. Right? And the whole audience is singing along. And I'm like, that's so cool. Right? And that's what I hope when we can get back to live events, that I can go in and I could say, okay, what are the 4 things you present to the executives, and the audience, right, can sort of sing. I have weird dreams, but they could sing and go, what is the risk? Come on, what's the next one? Likelihood of occurrence, cost if it occurs. You got it. And cost to fix it, right? That's all they care about, and that's all I present. So you want to go in and keep it very, very crisp. So they start off with these 47 slides, and I'm like, okay, buckle up. This ain't going good. And they start getting into all this technical detail. And I don't know if it's because I was there or the CEO was just beyond frustrated. But at one point, he looked up at the CISO and said, stop. He goes, these look like generic slides. Whether you work for our organization, another organization, healthcare, finance, oil and gas, he goes, these are very, very generic. I don't care about generic. I don't want a tutorial on cybersecurity. Very important lesson there. Most CISOs forget that they're the expert. Their executives don't want a tutorial on cybersecurity. They don't want to become the experts. They want you to provide the risks, the likelihood of occurrence, the cost of it occurs, and the cost to fix it. That's all they want. So he was giving them a tutorial, and he said, let me ask you a question. What business are we really in? How do we make money? And what is our biggest profit center in the organization? And it was sort of deer in the headlights. Now, if you ever get a question where you don't know the answer to, you definitely don't want to do what this individual did. And this individual, well, it's sort of, remember, everyone in the room knows the correct answer. So the best thing you could have done, and that person should have done, is to go, be honest with you. That is a great question. That is something I should know the answer to, but I don't want to speculate. So what I would like to do is, if after this meeting over the next several weeks, I would like to have some meetings with the COO and CFO and gather more information. And I promise you, for the next meeting, it will be more focused and aligned with the business. Now, not the best answer, but the best answer you could give under the circumstance. The best answer is the real answer. But if you don't know it, don't fudge or fake. And then the person was like, but since everyone knows what that is, like, blew them off, let me go back to the safety net. And that irritated the CEO, where he said, stop. I don't want to go through this slide deck. Do not go through another slide. If you don't know what business we're in and how we make money, then let's just end this presentation right now, because it's not going to be of value to us. And it was like, you just sort of felt it across the room. And I was like, oh, right? But you don't ever want to be in that situation. But let me help you out here. Many CISOs get lucky because they don't get the external embarrassment, because most CEOs are not that bold. Most CEOs are not going to call you out or the CISO out directly like that. However, many CISOs are still embarrassed because everyone in the room is thinking that and knows the CISO doesn't know the answer, because they're not talking about the business. They're not talking about what's important. They're not talking about how it's made. So the most important question that a CISO must be able to answer is, what business is your organization really in? That's the tricky. It's not what business are you in. Because you could go in, and I've seen this, where somebody goes in and says, oh, I work for a pharmaceutical company, so our business is pharmaceuticals. No, no, no. The business you are really in is high quality customer service, because every business has competitors and is known for something, right? Some businesses are known for low cost, right? Some businesses are known for high quality, right? For example, I don't think anybody is going to go in and you have date night with your significant other and you go, oh, I'm in the mood, I'm just really craving some beef. I mean, just really craving. Let's go to McDonald's, right? Super high quality, right? They're not the best burgers, right? But they're cheap, they're quick, and they're fast. And McDonald's doesn't try to go in and do that. And it's interesting because when McDonald's tried to do that, I don't know if you remember when they did all the higher end La Cafe, or it was terrible because that's not what they're known for, right? And that's okay. But you need to know that. So going in, if you're the CISO for McDonald's and you say, oh, the business we're in is making hamburgers, that's not correct. The business you're in is fast food that meets a certain level of quality at low cost. So if you're going in and you're slowing down the process at the drive-thru, that's going to be unacceptable. But if you work for a fine restaurant and you slow down the process, that's okay. Because when I go to McDonald's, if it takes 5 minutes more for me to get my burger, unacceptable. But if you go to a fine restaurant and it takes 5 minutes longer to get your meal, that probably is acceptable and you probably wouldn't even notice because you're having a good conversation. So it's really, what is the business you're really in, which is really a couple of sub-questions. What is your competitive advantage? And you can even say, who are your competitors? And then what gives you the competitive advantage in the marketplace? And how do you make money? What are the products that have the highest revenue and the highest profitability in your organization? And those questions need to be just like everything else. One of the things I always do with new CISOs is I'll sit down with them. I'll say, okay, can we do a quick rapid fire quiz? And they say, sure. I go, what's your name? Where do you live? How many kids do you have? That one was funny because I was with one CISO and they're like, what's your name? Eric Cole. Where do you live? Ashburn, Virginia. How many kids you have? And I kid you not, they were like, I'm like, do you not know how many kids? I mean, that's maybe that's true. I said I didn't mean it to be a trick question, right? But like the dude had to think about how many kids he had. I'm like, okay, so I removed that question from my list now because it just got a little too weird for me. So I'll go in and say, what's your name? Where do you live? What's your phone number? What's your birthday? What business is your company really in? What's the product that makes the most revenue? What's the biggest profitability area? How do you differentiate from your competition? And it must be rapid fire. If you spew out name, address, phone number, and then you have to pause or think about those other areas, you failed, right? It needs to be ingrained and embedded in your thought process. Just want to take a quick break. I hope you're enjoying the show. I have this free webinar that I would love for you to check out if you want to become a world-class CISO. And this is true if you're currently a CISO, if you want to be a CISO, or when you interview. I bring this up a lot. To get a CISO job, you don't need a ton of degrees. You don't need a ton. You need some, but not a ton of experience. What you need to do is ace the interview and show them that you are a business strategist in cybersecurity. And the way you do that in the interview is making sure you bring up that information. The good news is there's so much information out there on publicly traded companies, even private companies, that if you do some basic research, 5 or 6 hours, I bet you can find out what business they're really in, how they differentiate from the competition, what is their general revenue, and what are their biggest profitability. And you want to make sure that you fit that in. When I train people to go in and do interviews for CISO positions, that's your opening comment. I don't care what they ask. If they go in and say, Eric, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me your background. Tell me why you're qualified for the job. Whatever the opening question is, which is usually a softball, I will usually go in and say, yes, I worked in cybersecurity for many, many years, but my focus is really on security strategy. And I know your organization is currently at 200 million, and last year's numbers were 140, and the previous year's was 100. So you're growing by almost 50 to 70% each year. To continue that growth, we need to make sure that we differentiate from the competition with high value and quick turnaround. I know one of the big differentiators of your hospital with other hospitals is that when patients come in, you can actually get their test results back 5 times quicker than any other hospital. So we need to make sure that the security is embedded in such a way that it doesn't impede or slow down the overall process. And we also know that your biggest profitability area, and notice what I did. I redirected and reframed on what I wanted them to know. And I wanted to set the frame for the conversation that I know your business, I know your differentiators, and I know how you're set up and structured. And you'd probably, after that response, you can almost get a strange look because they're not ready for that. And that's not how most CISOs approach the problem. So as a CISO, you should always, always, always be thinking about what is the business we're really in, which is really asking who are our competition, what is our competitive advantage, and how do we make money? That is how you become a world-class CISO. Now, the other thing I want to focus on is world-class CISOs can take very, very complex topics and reduce them down to an abstract that the executives can understand. And that's one thing that I find doing. So let's break down attack vectors, because you go in and a lot of CISOs, and I get the question all the time, Eric, should a CISO be able to perform a pen test? Should a CISO be able to go in and work with the team on a pen test? And the answer is absolutely not. That's not your job. Now, could a CISO perform a pen test? Yes, maybe that's your life and you're switching gears, but it's not a requirement. Now, you should understand how to read a pen test. You should understand the general vectors of how organizations are compromised at a high level, which I'm going to cover in a minute, but you don't need to know how to perform a buffer overflow. You should know what a buffer overflow is, but you shouldn't have to be able to perform that activity. And that's one of the problems. Really, really good, super technical, world-class security engineers often do not make world-class CISOs. And there's 2 reasons for it. One reason is, let's face it, if you're going in and you're doing fuzzing and finding zero-day exploits, or you're doing detailed forensics of devices, you love that, right? You love doing that. That is what you love. That is probably your purpose. So now going in and taking that fish out of water and saying, well, now you have to focus solely on strategy and you can't do the stuff you love, it's just not going to work. They're either going to go back or they're going to get frustrated, angry, or upset. And the other reason is, even if they did want to make a career change, they're like, Eric, I love it. I fulfilled that purpose. Now I want to be a thought leader. Now I want to be strategy. That's what I love to do. That can happen. But it's still dangerous, because if that person was a world-class security engineer or forensic person, most likely they can probably do that work equal or better than the people that are reporting to them. So what I find happens in those situations when there is an incident or a problem, they'll task their team, and their team isn't doing it as well as them or as quick as them. They get frustrated and they're like, heck with it, let me just do it. And they just jump in and they start doing it and they start controlling it. And that's one of the worst things you do, because then there's nobody flying the plane. There's nobody communicating with the executives, and you've just isolated your team members because now they don't think you trust them or count on them. So I'm not saying that having a technical background is bad. I'm just saying you got to be cautious. Do you really want to be a strategist? And are you able to hang up, trust your team, even if they're not doing it the way you would, and not jump back into the technical? That's why I tend to find people that work in security 3, 5, 7 years that aren't super technical tend to make the better CISOs because they're not tied to the technical. They like the strategy. Like in one organization, the person that was a CISO was somebody who was there for 5 years, and they mainly focused on putting together reports and summaries of all the technical details. So they would take all of the pen tests and write summaries. They would take all the forensic reports and put together summaries. So they understood the language. They were experienced with how it works, but their focus was more on summarizing strategy, and they ended up being a wonderful, amazing CISO. Now, just so we're clear, once again, I know some technical people that make amazing CISOs. So I'm not saying you can't, but you just got to be really, really clear. But here's what a CISO has to remember. Your job is all about managing and understanding risk. Cybersecurity, if we do a little technical definition, is all about understanding, managing, and mitigating risk of your critical assets being disclosed, altered, or denied access. So as a CISO, you're always saying, what is our critical assets? What is most important? Confidentiality, integrity, availability. And what are the biggest risks to those organizations? Remember our top 3 questions. Before you spend an hour of your time or $1 of your budget on anything in the name of security, you always want to go in and ask yourself, what is the risk? Is this the highest priority risk? And is your solution the most cost-effective way of reducing it? If you can't answer those 3 questions, don't ask for the money. Because the point is, and I see this all the time, some new cool tech comes out, or somebody goes to one of the big security conferences like RSA, and they get sold on this amazing product, and they go back to the organization like, oh, we got to have this product. So they try going to the executives and saying, we need 400K because this product is amazing, it's wonderful, it solves world hunger. And very rarely you're going to get the money because guess what? It's emotional. You have gotten emotionally attached. You like it. You like the product. You think it's cool. This is why if you're really good at sales, like with cars and houses and things like that, what you try to do is get the person to get emotionally attached. Why do you think they have you sit in the car when they're talking to you? Why do you think when you have a really good salesperson and you're walking back to the showroom after you test drove the car, why do you think they have you hold the keys? Once again, it's all getting emotionally attached to it, right? Because you're holding the keys. You're like, this is my car. They even refer to it as your car, right? All strategies there. Vendors are great at that. But the problem is that's not how we secure an organization. You have to step back and do it differently. If you go to a big conference like an RSA or others, you should be going in saying, okay, our current top risks are X, Y, and Z. These are the problems we're currently having, and here's solutions that we need that we don't currently have. And then you go, and if it meets those solutions, great. But if it doesn't fit within your top risks, you don't talk to those vendors because all you're doing is going to be a distraction and get emotionally attached to products. So you want to make sure it always starts with what is the risk, is it the highest priority, and then which of these solutions is the most cost-effective way of doing it. And with risk, and what I want to talk about as we finish this up, is the threats times vulnerabilities equal risk. So if we really break it down, there's really only 4 general ways an adversary can get into your organization. At a general level, there's only 4 possible ways. A server that's visible from the internet, right? That's one way. A client that's targeted either directly or with spear-phishing. The third way is a internal asset that's compromised. So somebody goes in and pays off somebody, or you have a disgruntled employee. So somebody who's physically in your organization can plant or steal information. And then the fourth possible way is from a third-party vendor, a connection from an outside source. And once again, if you have other general categories, don't give me specific, but general categories that you think it's more than 4 or less than 4, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear from you. Post a message below. But I've been doing this for a long time, and one of my specialties and what you need to master as a chief information security officer is high-level analytics. So when I go into an organization as a CISO or train a CISO, it's like, okay, there's really only 4 possible vectors. What servers are visible from the internet? So let's go in and assess that risk. Clients being targeted, let's assess that risk. Physical access or entities within the organization, let's assess that risk. And third-party vendors. Those are pretty much the 4. And that's the problem. Organizations aren't structured in that manner, because if they were structured in that manner, we wouldn't see cases where servers are accessible from the internet, missing patches, containing critical data that's not properly encrypted. They would know about it. They would know about the server. They would know that it wasn't patched. They would know that the data wasn't protected, and they would fix it. So what I do as a CISO is I go in and I say, okay, to my technical team, we must know all servers that are accessible from the internet, and there's 2 simple rules. These are non-negotiables. Rule 1, any system that's accessible from the internet must be fully patched. If it can't be fully patched because there's some interaction or conflict with software, then it's not worthy of being on the internet. We'll set up some tier, we'll set up some other models, but it's not worthy. Second non-negotiable, any system that's accessible from the internet never contains critical data or critical information. Everything else is good, but those 2 are non-negotiables. So now your team is structured that when they go and they get put on projects, they're going to very quickly assess what systems are accessible from the internet, and they're going to go in and make sure that they're fully patched and they do not contain critical data. On the client side, while there's many vectors there, the main one is spear-phishing. Now, this is one that, once again, the adversary knows the rules of emotion. So you can sit there and tell people all day long, don't click on attachments, don't click on attachments. But if they can get emotional, they will click on it every day. I just did this experiment, and it blew my mind. A couple months ago, I took 50 people, and I put them through 30 minutes of executive awareness, where I told them about targets, I told them about exposures, and I even told them about COVID-specific threats. I said, if you get any email that talks about COVID or has COVID or anything like that, make sure you're super careful, because that's what the adversary is targeting you. So 30 minutes, focus, gave them specific examples. 2 hours later, after they completed that awareness training, we sent the 50 people a very specific COVID phishing attack. And it basically said, coworkers tested positive for COVID. And then the body said, 5 of your employees have tested positive for COVID. While we know that many people work from home, there could still be direct contact. So we urge you to check this list and see if you know anyone directly or indirectly that might have come in contact with them. Please notify us immediately if there's any concerns. And you ready for this? 42 of the 50 people still clicked on it. Even after we told them And less than 2 hours ago, we put them through 30 minutes. So this concept, don't get me wrong, awareness is good, and awareness helps to a point. But if you think awareness is going to solve the problem, you are wrong. It helps, it's important, it's critical, but alone it's not going to help. Also, telling people not to do things also doesn't work. Now, I'm not saying this is perfect, but what we do is we'll tell high-profile people, executives, others, and even workers, listen, what you need to do is always do a first pass of your email on a non-Windows device, because most of the malware and phishing attacks are targeted for Windows because it's a 90% install base. So what I train everybody on is, and I do the same thing, when I do initial checks of email on anything that might be suspicious, I'm going to go in and check it on my iPad or my iPhone, make sure it looks and acts legitimate, and then and only then do I go in and use it on my system. Because if it's malicious and I open it on a non-Windows device and it's a Windows phish, it'll just give a weird error message or show something strange, but it'll be pretty clear that it's not legit. So those are the types of solutions CISOs need to do. You need high level, break down the problem, 4 general ways people break in, and then come up with solutions and rules that meet against it. And that's how you build not only a world-class CISO organization, but become a world-class CISO. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Life of a CISO. If you like more information on my CISO cert, go to secure-anchor.com CISO. I'd love to have one of my team members jump on a call with you. And please go and pre-order your copy of Cyber Crisis at cybercrisisbook.com for you and your executives. And once again, thank you for joining me on my mission to make cyberspace a safe place to live, work, and raise a family.